on in, take a seat. We break it down, make it easy.
Have you ever noticed how often we just inherit these massive concepts about life without ever looking at the original blueprints?
Oh, absolutely. All the time.
Right. Like, think about the universe or history or even, your personal ideas about the divine. We are essentially handed this fully built, finished house, and we move all our mental furniture into it.
Yeah, and we rarely stop to ask who poured the foundation or what the architectural drawings even looked like in the first place.
Exactly. Because, honestly, it is so much easier to just live in the house than to inspect the plumbing.
It really is. I mean, when it comes to complex subjects, especially theology or philosophy, human nature just prefers the comfort of a settled system. We sort of accept the prevailing frameworks of our culture as absolute givens.
Yeah, because questioning the foundation requires, well, a lot of heavy lifting.
It's exhausting work.
It definitely is. But today, we are going down into the basement with a flashlight to look at the foundation.
Welcome to the deep dive. We are exploring a text that completely challenges the mainstream architectural blueprints of Christian theology. It's a fascinating one, too.
It really is. The material we're looking at is a book called The Oneness of God. It's Volume 1 of Pentecostal Theology, written by David K. Bernard. Now, just to be completely clear with you listening, our goal here is not to tell you what to believe.
Right. We're not taking a stance here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We are not here to endorse this theology, and we are not here to condemn it. We are simply exploring the mechanics of the arguments presented. Because the way this framework reconstructs the concept of the divine is just incredibly thought-provoking.
It represents a really profound shift in perspective. If you look at mainstream Christianity, it largely operates on the framework of Trinitarianism.
Right, the Trinity.
Yeah, the idea of one God existing simultaneously in three distinct persons. But what this source material presents is a rigorous, deeply systematic argument for a strict, uncompromising view of Christian monotheism. It's known as oneness theology.
Right. So the mission of this deep dive is to explore a worldview that flat out rejects that popular idea of a Trinity, or three persons in the Godhead. Instead, this framework argues that God is absolutely indivisibly one.
Numerically one.
Yes. And the ultimate conclusion we are building toward today is the claim that Jesus is not a separate second person of God, but is actually the single unified God of the Old Testament, like Jehovah himself wrapped in human flesh.
That's the core thesis.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to understand who Jesus is in this specific system, we really have to start with its strict definition of who God is.
Yeah, that absolute oneness is the anchor for this entire worldview. To understand this theology, you have to realize it is fiercely protective of strict monotheism. It systematically rejects any concept that divides God's identity in any way.
And the foundation for this is a famous verse in the Old Testament, right?
Yes. Deuteronomy 6.4, which is known as the Shema. It simply says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord."
There's a really striking anecdote in the source material about the Shema that brings this home perfectly. It's a story of a trip to Jerusalem to buy tefillin.
Oh, yeah, that's a great example.
For those of you listening who might not know, tefillin are those small leather boxes containing scripture scrolls. Orthodox Jews bind them to their foreheads and arms during prayer. So the author or the buyer goes to this Orthodox Jewish merchant, and the merchant initially flat out refuses to sell the tefillin.
Right, because he realizes the buyer is a Christian.
Exactly. The merchant believed that Christians inherently distort the concept of strict monotheism by worshiping three persons.
That cultural encounter just perfectly highlights the ancient, unbreakable reverence for the one God concept. I mean, to get the merchant to sell to him, the buyer actually has to look the merchant in the eye and quote the Shema in Hebrew.
Wow.
Yeah, he had to explain a total, uncompromising adherence to the idea that God is absolutely numerically one. And only then does the merchant's face light up and the transaction happens. It vividly illustrates how the Jewish people have historically guarded this monotheism. They perceive anything else as a step toward polytheism.
It's a really tense, powerful moment. So building on that foundation of absolute oneness, this theology defines the nature of God as a spirit.
Invisible and omnipresent.
Meaning God is everywhere all at once. He's not confined by a body, not limited to a specific zip code in the universe. But honestly, that creates a mental roadblock for me.
How so?
Well, if I open the Psalms or the prophets, the text constantly talks about God's eyes or his right hand, or describes him as sitting on a throne in heaven. If God is an invisible spirit without a physical body, why all the highly physical, localized descriptions?
This is where we have to understand the concept of anthropomorphism.
That sounds like a really dense academic term.
It does, yeah, but it is actually a beautiful communication tool. Anthropomorphism is just the practice of using finite human terms to describe an infinite non-human reality.
So it's essentially projecting our physical, earthly experience onto a spiritual being, just so our mudbound human brains can grasp something infinite.
Precisely. Think about it from the perspective of the ancient writers. How do you describe the limitless power of an invisible spirit? You use what you know.
Like a strong right hand.
Exactly. So when the text says God's right hand spans the heavens, it is a metaphor for immense power and reach. It's not a literal claim that there is a giant physical hand floating in the atmosphere.
Right, right.
And regarding God sitting on a throne in heaven, this framework is very clear. God is not confined to a chair in the sky. Heaven simply refers to the center of his activity or the focal point of his overwhelming glory. He is fully present in heaven, but simultaneously fully present everywhere else in the universe.
Okay, that makes logical sense, but it leads to an obvious problem for me. If God is this infinite, invisible spirit filling every inch of the universe, how did ancient humanity actually interact with him? I mean, you can't exactly shake hands with omnipresence.
No, you can't.
If you're walking through the desert, how do you experience a God who has no physical boundaries without completely losing your mind?
Well, because finite humans cannot directly view an omnipresent, unveiled spirit and survive the experience, this framework explains that God used what are called theophanies.
Theophanies, okay.
Yeah, a theophany is a temporary, visible manifestation of God.
Like the burning bush with Moses.
Yes, the burning bush is a classic example. Another is the frequent Old Testament appearance of the angel of the Lord, though there is a very careful, nuanced distinction made here in the text.
What kind of distinction?
The phrase angel of the Lord sometimes refers to a temporary, visible manifestation of God himself, stepping into human history for a brief moment. But at other times, it refers to a literal, created, angelic being acting as God's messenger.
Got it. But temporary physical forms weren't the main way God revealed himself, were they? If you dig into the material, the most vital way God made himself known before the incarnation was through his name.
Oh, absolutely. The name was everything.
And if you're listening to this right now, we really have to strip away our modern Western understanding of names. Today, your name is mostly just a convenient label to get your attention across a crowded Starbucks.
True.
But in the ancient Near East, a name was a deeply profound concept. It was practically an extension of your personality. A name represented your character, your presence, your power, and your authority.
The psychology of ancient names is fascinating. To invoke someone's name was to invoke their reality, and the supreme sacred name of God was YHWH, Yahweh, or Jehovah.
Which they wouldn't even say out loud, right?
Right. It carried such immense, terrifying weight for the Jewish people that they eventually stopped speaking it aloud entirely. They would substitute it with Adonai, meaning Lord, simply to avoid the risk of taking the supreme name in vain. And what is brilliant about this framework is how it tracks God, using names as a method of progressive revelation.
It's like layering a painting. God didn't reveal his entire character all at once. He revealed compound names based on specific human crises.
Yes.
Like when the Israelites were starving and needed provision, God revealed himself as Jehovah Jireh, the Lord who provides. When they were sick, he became Jehovah Rapha, the Lord that heals. He was slowly, intentionally unveiling his character piece by piece.
It was a very intentional progression.
But wait, I have to push back here.
Yeah.
You are painting this picture of a strictly invisible God using temporary theophanies and names. But look at the book of Daniel. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are thrown into the fiery furnace. King Nebuchadnezzar looks in and literally says he sees a fourth man, and he describes him as the Son of God. That seems to completely dismantle the oneness argument right there. Doesn't that prove there was a pre-incarnate Jesus, a separate son walking around in the Old Testament?
It definitely seems that way in English translations, but to understand this theology's counter-argument, you really have to look at the original Aramaic text. In the original language, there is no definite article. It doesn't say the Son of God.
Oh, really?
Yeah. A much more accurate rendering, which you will actually find in most modern scholarly translations, is a son of the gods.
Because it's King Nebuchadnezzar talking. He's
Yeah.
a polytheistic, pagan king. He's just using his own Babylonian vocabulary to describe something supernatural.
Exactly. Nebuchadnezzar had absolutely no concept of a coming Jewish Messiah or a complex divine hierarchy. This framework argues that the figure in the fire was very likely a literal angel sent to protect them. The theology is completely adamant that the role of the Son had not even begun yet. The concept of the Son requires actual humanity, and that humanity did not exist until the manger in Bethlehem.
Which is a huge distinction.
It is. This is where this theology sharply diverges from early historical ideas like Arianism. Arianism suggested Jesus was a sort of created junior demigod running errands in the Old Testament. The oneness view rejects that entirely. Any visible manifestation back then was just a temporary shadow, not a pre-existing God the Son.
So if the burning bushes, the angels, and all those compound Jehovah names were just shadows, what was the substance? I mean, they were all foreshadowing the ultimate, permanent, complete revelation of God's identity.
Right.
And according to this material, that complete revelation is Jesus. Think about the name itself. The name Jesus is the Greek equivalent of Joshua, which literally translates to Jehovah's Savior.
It's incredible when you look at the translation.
So Jesus isn't just a new separate title. It is the grand culmination of all those Old Testament compound names. Everything Jehovah was, Jesus is.
That is the beating heart of this entire theological structure. Jesus is the Father incarnate. To support this, the framework relies heavily on verses like Colossians 2:9, which states, "For in him dwelleth all the fullness of the Godhead bodily."
All the fullness.
Yes. The argument is clear. Jesus isn't merely a fraction of God. He isn't 1/3 of a divine committee. Every single attribute of the invisible Spirit is contained within him.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. The source material spends a lot of time on the concept of the Logos, or the Word, from the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God.
A very famous passage.
Right, and reading through how they describe the Logos, it makes me think of an analogy. Imagine a brilliant playwright. This playwright has written an absolute masterpiece, but the entire script, the dialogue, the characters, the raw emotion, it all exists solely in the playwright's invisible mind.
Okay, I follow.
That unexpressed genius is the eternal Word. It is God's perfect internal plan. And then, one day, the playwright doesn't just hire external actors to perform it. The playwright literally steps onto the stage, puts on the costume of human flesh, and acts out the masterpiece himself.
Oh, that's good.
The invisible playwright and the visible lead actor are the exact same being, just operating in a different mode of expression.
That analogy perfectly captures the transition from the invisible Logos to the physical Jesus. It also explains why this theology fought so hard against historical movements like Gnosticism.
Gnosticism, right. Remind me what that is.
Gnosticism essentially claimed that spirit was good and physical matter was evil. So they believed the supreme God could never touch a physical body. They argued the Logos was just a lesser created emanation, like a buffer between God and the dirty physical world.
Oh, wow.
But this framework utterly rejects that. The Word wasn't a subordinate deity. The Word was the very mind of the Creator choosing to clothe itself in humanity.
And the staggering thing is, the people living in ancient Judea actually grasped the gravity of what Jesus was saying. When Jesus stood in front of the religious leaders and said, "Before Abraham was, I am," they didn't stroke their beards and think he was claiming to be a secondary angelic messenger.
Not at all. They immediately bent down, picked up heavy stones, and prepared to execute him for blasphemy on the spot.
Because to the ancient Jewish ear, the phrase "I am" wasn't just a grammatical quirk. It was the sacred, terrifying name of Jehovah spoken at the burning bush.
Exactly. They perfectly understood the psychological weight of his claim. He was claiming to be the singular, absolute God of their ancestors standing right in front of them in a physical body. They understood the claim completely. They just fiercely refused to believe it was true.
Okay, so we've established that this theology views Jesus as the eternal Father. But if we stop right there, we run into a massive, glaring logical puzzle.
Yes, we do.
If Jesus is the eternal, all-powerful, omnipresent Father, how do we make sense of the gospel accounts where Jesus is kneeling in the dirt, weeping and praying, or sleeping in the back of a boat because he's exhausted, or the ultimate paradox, dying on a cross?
Right.
By definition, the eternal Spirit of God cannot die. So how does this framework keep from collapsing under those contradictions?
To navigate those apparent contradictions, you have to look at the framework's strict definition of the term the Son. This theology points out that the popular phrase God the Son is entirely unbiblical. It never actually appears in the original text.
Really? Never.
Never. Instead, the correct phrase is Son of God. And here's the crucial distinction. In this worldview, Son of God refers strictly and exclusively to the humanity of Jesus, or to deity, as it is operating inside that localized human flesh.
Wait, Jill, let me make sure I have this straight. Father equals the eternal, invisible, omnipresent Spirit. Son equals the finite, physical human flesh that was born in Bethlehem.
Correct. And because the Son refers to the physical humanity, the Son had a specific beginning in time. The Son began at conception in Mary's womb. Therefore, the concept of an eternal Son is considered a complete logical contradiction in this framework.
Because flesh isn't eternal.
Exactly. The invisible Spirit is eternal, but the physical Son is not.
Wow. If you put yourself in the shoes of early Christians trying to categorize this, you can see why it caused such an uproar. This is all about the dual nature.
The early church struggled immensely to articulate how one person could be both God and man. The source material outlines how people swung to wild extremes. You had Docetism, a view heavily influenced by Greek philosophy, which decided physical flesh was too corrupt for God. So they claimed Jesus was only a spirit, and his physical body was just an optical illusion, like a phantom that only appeared to suffer.
Which completely invalidates the physical sacrifice of the cross.
Exactly the problem. Then, on the other end of the spectrum, you had Nestorianism. They couldn't figure out how God and man could mix, so they suggested the divine and human in Jesus were basically two completely separated persons. A divine person and a human person, practically just sharing the same skin.
Like two entirely different roommates trapped in a single physical body.
Yeah, pretty much. But the oneness view emphatically rejects both of those extremes. It argues for a complete, authentic, vulnerable human nature that is inextricably and perfectly joined with the divine spirit of the Father. It is not two distinct persons. It is one unified person operating with two authentic natures.
Which brings up the ultimate theological puzzle. If Jesus had a truly complete human nature, meaning he had authentic human desires, a human will, and human biology, could he sin? I mean, a human nature by definition has the capacity for free will, right?
This raises an important question, and the theology navigates it with a very specific psychological nuance. Theoretically, if you were to somehow isolate the human nature of Jesus, yes, human nature can choose sin. He possessed the exact same innocent human nature that Adam had in the Garden of Eden before the fall. And history shows us exactly what Adam chose to do with his free will.
Right. Adam had the sheer capacity to fail, and he did.
But practically speaking, within the person of Jesus, that human nature was never isolated because the divine, entirely Holy Spirit of the Father was inextricably joined to that humanity, and in absolute driving control, Jesus could not and did not sin. A spirit-controlled humanity simply does not choose rebellion.
So the theoretical possibility of failure is completely overshadowed by the practical impossibility of the spirit yielding to temptation.
Exactly.
But wait, doesn't that make his temptations basically staged? If he literally couldn't fail, was he just play-acting the struggle?
That is a critical pushback, but the framework argues the struggle was terrifyingly real. Think about the Garden of Gethsemane. The human will of Jesus was buckling under the agonizing psychological and physical weight of the impending crucifixion. He was sweating drops of blood.
Yeah, that's true agony.
The human instinct for self-preservation was screaming, "Let this cup pass from me." He authentically felt the massive, crushing, gravitational pull of temptation and fear.
But the divine will held the human will steady. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done.
Precisely. Because he authentically felt the sheer agonizing weight of human struggle without ever surrendering to it, he perfectly qualifies as a high priest. He completely understands the frailty of our human weaknesses because he felt the exact same pressure. The temptation was real, but the divine spirit ensured the humanity never succumbed.
Okay, we have covered an incredible amount of conceptual ground here today. From the uncompromising numerical oneness of the Old Testament God, to the progressive layering of his names, to the bold claim that Jesus is the culmination of Jehovah acting on the human stage, and finally into the deep mechanics of the dual nature that allowed an infinite God to suffer. So, what does this all mean?
For anyone looking at this theological blueprint, it means adopting a unified, seamless lens for reading the entirety of the biblical text. It entirely removes the need to divide the divine identity into multiple persons.
Yeah, it simplifies the whole narrative.
It does. It offers a dramatic picture of one continuous, unchanging God from the opening words of Genesis to the final page of Revelation. The exact same invisible God who hovered over the dark waters of creation is the very same God who physically wept at the tomb of Lazarus, and the exact same God who sits on the throne at the end of time.
It is a framework that takes the vast, incomprehensible, almost terrifying infinity of the Old Testament Creator and distills it down into a single, approachable, weeping human face, the face of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
If you are listening to this, whether you agree with the theology or not, you have to admit it makes you look at those ancient scriptures with completely fresh eyes.
It absolutely does. And, there is one final mind-bending thought from the source material that we should really leave the listener to ponder.
What was that?
We talked about how the sonship, the physical humanity, had a specific beginning in Bethlehem for the strict purpose of redemption. Well, pointing to the writings of the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 15, the framework notes that the role of the Son will, in some sense, have an ending.
Hold on. The role of the Son actually comes to an end.
Yes, the theology suggests that once the final enemy, which is death, is permanently destroyed, and the redemptive mission of the physical flesh is entirely complete, the distinct mediatory role of the Son will be submerged back into the absolute, undivided supremacy of the Spirit.
Wow.
So if you are driving right now or just going about your day, I would ask you to mull that over. What does it actually mean for the specific role of the Son to eventually conclude while the one eternal God remains, all in all, forever?
That is a staggering, massive thought to leave off on. You really do have to step back and look at the foundation all over again. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep examining the blueprints, keep pushing back and asking those difficult questions, and we hope you keep finding those aha moments. We will catch you next time.